MotzfeldtNiobium-Tantalum mineralization in the Motzfeldt Centre of the Nepheline Syenite complex, South Greenland, by T.Tukiainen. Abstract. The Motzfeldt Centre, 1310 plus or minus 10 million years, is one of the major central complexes in the Gardar Province of alkaline igneous activity. The Motzfeldt Centre is made up of multiple intrusions of syenite, with a wide range of textural and compositional characteristics. The syenites are emplaced as two main igneous phases into the Proterozoic Julianehåb Granite and the unconformably overlying Gardar supracrustal rocks. The syenites of the early igneous phase occur as isolated bodies, which are truncated by the syenite units of the main igneous phase. The Motzfeldt Ring Series. The bulk of the Motzfeldt Ring Series constitutes three major steep-sided, outward-dipping intrusions of predominantly peralkaline syenite and Nepheline syenite, which young inwards. The apparent intrusion mechanism was a combination of ring fracture and block subsidence. Large quantities of the roofing sandstone and volcanics have been incorporated into the outermost unit of the Motzfeldt Ring Series, the Motzfeldt Formation, where they are preserved as large rafts. The sandstone has, however, been largely assimilated and has given the outer zone of the Motzfeldt Formation its unique, for the centre, quartz-normative character. The Motzfeldt Formation underwent an extreme in-situ differentiation, probably due to the effective crystal fractionization, which resulted in the formation of a peralkaline residuum, rich in volatile, incompatible elements. The peralkaline residua gives rise to a complex of late peralkaline sheets of microcrystalline and pegmatic and hydrothermal alteration, with associated Th, U, Nb, Ta, Zr, and rare earth element mineralization, which increases in intensity towards the margins and especially towards the roof of the intrusion. The mineralization is probably the result of the combination of an incompatible element / volatile enriched magmatic residuum and an influx of silica and meteoric water, which has resulted in a dramatic increase in oxygen fugacity, acidity, and hydrothermal activity. A volatile saturated outer shell developed, which facilitated the migration, accumulation, and precipitation of the incompatible elements. The Motzfeldt Formation hosts zones of economically interesting pyrochlore enrichment. The pyrochlore enrichment, by the enrichment of the light rare earth elements tantalum and uranium, shows marked compositional variation depending on its relative depth in the Motzfeldt Formation. The Ta content and the niobidium/Ta ratio of the pyrochlore varies within wide limits, from 1.5 to 10% titanium dioxide Ta2O5, and from 8 to more than 50 respectively. The pyrochlore at the deeper levels is enriched in Ta and Ca, whereas the pyrochlore at the higher levels of the igneous column is more enriched in niobidium, uranium, and light rare earth elements. Number 1. Introduction. The alkaline intrusive rocks of the Motzfeldt area make up one of the major manifestations of the mid-Proterozoic ca. 1320 to 1120 Ma alkaline magmatism in South Greenland. The area affected by this event, the Gardar Province, displays a variety of alkaline rocks which show a compositional continuum from basaltic to salic alkaline compositions. The Gardar igneous activity has been related to repetitive rifting with the mid-Proterozoic supercontinent of North America, Greenland, and Europe. The Gardar activity commenced with the large-scale uprise of transitionally alkaline basalts, and Hawaiites, which, together with sandstone, are preserved in downfaulted units, Eriksfjord Formation. The basement and the unconformably overlying Eriksfjord Formation were intruded by a variety of alkaline dikes and about 10 central complexes, which vary in size from a few hundred metres across to, ca. 45 kilometres in diameter. The mineralization in the Motzfeldt area was discovered in 1979 by the Drainage Geochemical and Airborne Gamma Spectrometric Resonance Reconnaissance Surveys of the Syenite project, which was partially financed by the ECC during the period 1st of December 1979 to the 1st of December 1980. The geological and radiometrics mapping of the Motzfeldt area was commenced in 1982 as part of the extended Syenite project under the Danish Ministry of Energy's research programs of 1981 and 1982. The purpose of the study was to make a detailed geological and radiometric map of the alkaline rocks of the Motzfeldt area, with a view to provide a reliable reference framework for the evaluation of the economic mineral potential of these rocks. The latest phase in the economic geological research of the Motzfeldt area was undertaken by the project Pyrochlore in alkaline intrusions of Greenland, which was partly funded by the ECC. The project has been carried out in collaboration with the University of Durham, United Kingdom, and Technische Universität München, West Germany. This chapter summarizes the results of the Danish contribution to the project. Number 2. The Motzfeldt Centre. The alkaline rocks of the Motzfeldt area constitute one of the 4 intrusive centres of the Igneous-Nepheline Syenite complex. The igneous activity in the Igneous complex spans through the entire Gardar period. The Motzfeldt Centre being, with some uncertainty, the oldest, 1310 plus or minus 31 million years, of the Igneous centres. Blaxland et al. 1978 reported a low initial SR87 versus SR86 ratio of 0.7024 for the Motzfeldt Centre, which indicates a primitive mantle origin for the parental magma, with only a little, if any, assimilation of the siliciclastic crustal rocks. 2.1. Geology and Structure. The Motzfeldt area, with steep-sided glacially dissected valleys, provides a virtually three-dimensional, ca. 1,500-metre high, vertical exposure across multi-phase, high-level alkaline intrusion. The Motzfeldt Centre appears to be a classic example of central-type alkaline complexes, which developed through a successive emplacement of syenite magma guided by a combination of ring fractures and block subsidence. The Motzfeldt Centre developed through 2 major phases of igneous activity. The syenite units of the early phase of the Volatile Formation originally comprised a number of separate syenite stocks, which are now truncated by syenite units of the main igneous phase. The Motzfeldt Ring Series, MRS. The Motzfeldt Ring Series is made up of concentric steep-sided intrusions of syenite whose marginal contacts dip outwards. The intrusions young inwards. The main igneous phase commenced with the emplacement of Motzfeldt Formation, or MSF, which now occupies the outer zone of the Ring Series. The Flinks-Dahl Formation, the FDF, is made up of at least 3 intrusions, emplaced in the following order: porphyritic Nepheline syenite, phorite and coarse-grained Nepheline syenite, and the largest igneous event affecting the centre was the intrusion of sheet-like bodies of cyanogabbro, lavakite, and saturated syenite. The chronological position of the saturated syenite is not known in detail. The syenites of the Ring Series contain numerous screens and rafts of Gardar's rocks. The majority of these are trachyte and phonolite, with subordinate basalt and sandstone. The major intrusions of the Ring Series syenites are cumulative rocks, as manifested by mineral layering and cumulus textures. The majority of the syenites are peralkaline and undersaturated with respect to silica. Jones, in 1980, on the basis of field and laboratory evidence, mainly from the rocks of the FDF, or the Flinks-Dal Formation, concluded that the larger units of the Ring Series were emplaced as magmas of phonolithic composition, and he attributed the variations in rock types to varying degrees of crustal fractionation in situ and differential accumulation from the initially homogeneous magma. The Syenite units of the centre were affected by two major sets of vertical or nearly vertical faults, one striking northeast-southwest, older, and another approximately east-west, younger. The largest dislocations took place along the east-west striking faults. The most spectacular of these faults, the Flinks-Dal fault, traverses the whole centre with a horizontal sinistral component of about 6 kilometres. Some of the faults also display a prominent vertical component, providing that the basement Eriksfjord formation unconformably is a reliable reference surface. The vertical component varies from ca 100 metres to more than 800 metres. 2.2 Motzfeldt Centre Formation NB-TA Mineralization Niobium and Tantalum. The Motzfeldt Centre Formation is the largest intrusion in the Ring Series and now occupies its outer zone. The MSF Syenites stand out on the radiometric maps of the centre due to the enrichment of uranium and thorium in these rocks. The MSF can be divided into two concentric zones, namely the inner Nepheline syenite and the outer. Altered syenite, which is characterized by hydrothermal alteration. The boundary of the hematitic alteration is in places conspicuously sharp, but no evidence of the zones as separate intrusions has been found. The MSF hosts a complex of late peralkaline sheets. The geometry of these sheet complexes is kind of cupular, with apparently conforms to the bell jar shape of the intrusion roof. The frequency and thickness of the sheets increase upwards in the MSF. The inner part of the MSF, the Nepheline cellite, contains merely a series of more or less irregular pegmatite sheets with subordinate microsyenite. At higher levels, mainly in the altered syenite, the geometry of the sheet complex becomes more persistent, although the sheets are still reminiscent of zoned pegmatite bodies with a microsyenite interior. At the highest levels of the MSF, the microsyenite component of the sheets predominates, and the sheet display pronounced intrusive relationships with the older rocks. The northeastern part of the centre displays the most complete section across the sheet complex, where the aggregate maximum thickness of the sheet complex is ca 700 metres, including screens of older syenite. The alteration is strikingly restricted to these rock types, and this indicates that the hydrothermal activity was immediately related to the igneous evolution of the MSF. It invades both the MSF syenite, the altered syenite, and the peralkaline microsyenite. The country rocks, the basement granite, and the Eckersford Formation are virtually unaffected by alteration or mineralization. 2.3 Petrographical characteristics of the Motzfeldt Centre Formation. The following petrographical description is in part based upon the data which was kindly provided by C. Bradshaw of the University of Durham. The MSF Nepheline syenite is a coarse-grained rock containing abundant pegmatite patches which range from fist-sized closed vugs to major sheet-like bodies. The rock often displays a sinistous texture having amphibole, pyroxene, iron oxides, and apatite clustered together. Mesoperthitic alkali feldspar 60%, Nepheline 25%, and NaCa pyroboles 15% are essential minerals. The alkali feldspar grains, 1 to 10 mm in length, are randomly orientated and subhedral, granular in habit. Albite becomes more abundant in the more evolved rocks. Both amphibole which is a major mafic phase, and pyroxene show distinct zonation and a wide range of compositions. The main amphibole phase in the less evolved rock is ferroendotitic hornblende, ferroedenite, which only a narrow rim of catophorite. In a more evolved rocks, the predominant amphibole is catophorite, although the larger catophorite crystals have discrete cores of ferroendotitic hornblende or ferrodenite. The zonation is discontinuous, with the core being rimmed by small orange biotite flakes, and the Fe-Ti oxides are all enclosed by catophorite. The pyroxene centers range in composition from salite to ferrosalite, the grains being rimmed by aragonite to augite or aragonite Herdenbergite. Aragonite occurs as individual crystals in the more evolved and pegmatitic rocks. The MSF altered syenite ranges from luceotypic to mesotypic and is characterized by reddish-brown discoloration. The altered syenite is texturally heterogeneous. The textural complexity increases towards the margin of the NSF. The heterogenetics are due to extreme variation in grain size, which varies from aplitic to coarsely pegmatitic, and irregularities in distribution of mafic minerals. Myorelitic cavities, variably filled with quartz and other minerals, are a standard feature. The primary NaCa pyroboles, characteristics of the Nepheline syenite, are virtually absent in the MSF altered syenite. The predominating mafic silicate is arsenidonite, which is both optically and compositionally homogeneous. A variety of the MSF altered syenite rich is arsenidonite. Up to 60% of the mode occurs sporadically in the margin of the MSF. In the alkali feldspar, the first manifestation of the alteration is the appearance of a finely disseminated iron oxide dust and micaceous alteration products. The increasing degree of alteration is accompanied by the appearance of specular hematite and fresh albite, replacing the alkali feldspar. In the extreme cases of the albertization, there are merely braids or patches of the original perthite left in the feldspar grains. Fluorite is a rock-forming mineral in the MSF altered syenite and constitutes up to 10% of mode. In the more intensely altered rocks, zircon, thorite, and pyrochlore become important constituents. Zircon and thorite are ubiquitous, and pyrochlore is enriched in patchy, discontinuous zones adjacent to the intrusion margin. The peralkaline microsyenite ranges from leuco to mesotypic and is texturally and compositionally very variable. The mesotypic rocks are microsyenite, grain size less than 1 mm. The leucotypic variations are coarser grained and often pegmatic. The peralkaline microsyenite displays a well-developed banding, with alteration bands ranging from a few centimeters to several meters of luceocratic and mesocratic microsyenite. The banding is irregular, displaying small folds and pinch and swell structures, coupled with rapid fluctuations in composition. The texture of the mesocratic rocks varies from massive to laminated, and the rocks are characteristically porphyritic, with phenocrysts of orthoclase up to 5 mm in length in a matrix of orthoclase, albite, arsenite, animagite, edialite, analsemite, and in most cases, however, heavily altered to analsemite and micas, spherulite, lavasonite, arthrophyllite, zircon, pyrochlore, and micaceous alteration products are characteristic accessories. Apart from the coarser grain size and higher feldspar content, the mineralogy of the luceotypic rocks is similar. The general scheme of the alteration process in the peralkaline microsyenite is very similar to that of the MSF syenite. Eudolite is replaced by zircons, unidentified Zr and rare earth element silicates, bastonite, catapulite, albite, and fluorite are already in the early stages of alteration. In the most intensively altered rocks, thorite, hydrous varieties of zircon, pyrochlore, and rare earth element carbonates become essential constituents. 2.4 Geochemical characteristics of the Motzfeldt SO formation. Table 1 shows some geochemical values of the syenite units in the Motzfeldt Centre. The unaltered Nepheline system of the MRS has very similar major element compositions and agapitic ratios close to unity. The fractionation index also shows a narrow range of values, from 88 to 89. The data for the unaltered peralkaline microsyenite in Table 1 summarize the characteristics of the mesotypic, fine-grained varieties of this suite. Their silica saturation varies from saturated to undersaturated, whereby the rocks become agapitic. As to the trace element concentration levels, the values of the high field strength HFS elements Zr, Nb, Ta, Th, and U are fairly similar in all the unaltered Nepheline syenites of the MRS. The low field strength LFS elements Ba, Sr, and Rb show more pronounced variation. The unaltered peralkaline microsyenite is strongly enriched in the HFS elements, which is first of all due to the variably high content of edulite. The pegmatic varieties of this rock suite are in places very rich, up to 40% of the mode, in eudolite, E, U, D, I, A, L, Y, T, E, eudolite. The changes in the major element geochemistry, along with the increasing alteration of the MSF, are essentially due to an increase in silica, which is counterbalanced by a decrease in the Na, K, and Al. Such characteristics as agapitic ratio, differentiation index, and normative composition are questionable value for the altered rocks because the element concentrations are, to a young varying extent, related to hydrothermal processes. For the sake of comparison, they are given in Table 1. The trace element content of the altered syenite is characterized by a dramatic increase in the content of HFS elements and a decrease in the LFS elements, whereby some of the HFS elements are locally enriched in economically interesting amounts. The rare earth element distribution patterns, Figure 5, demonstrate the overall enrichment of the light rare earth elements. There is a relative enrichment of heavy rare earth elements from the altered syenite through peralkaline microsyenite to alkyd microsyenite. The rare earth element spectra are characterized by increasing magnitude of the negative EU anomaly from the MSF Nepheline syenite, which shows only a slight negative anomaly or no anomaly at all, to the MSF altered syenite and microsyenite. 2.5 The Pyrochlore Mineralization. Apart from being a common accessory mineral to the altered syenites, pyrochlore occurs in zones of economically interesting enrichment in the altered MSF systems and altered peralkaline microsyenite. The mineralization in the altered MSF syenite is considered more attractive from the exploration point of view because of its major mineralogy and higher Ta content. The locations of the known major occurrences are indicated in the geological map in Figure 1. The preliminary estimates of the size and grade of the best known zones, based on the interpretation of the airborne radiometric data and the available rock analyses, indicate that the mineralization in the altered MSF syenites totals some 50 million tons of rock, whose Ta2O5 and Mb2O5 content vary from 0.03 to 0.01 and from 0.04 to 1% respectively. These rock volumes may contain minor bodies of higher grade with 0.08 to 0.15% and 1 to 1.5% Ta2O5 and Mb2O5 respectively. The pyrochlore occurs as euhedral grains, which often have a thin coating of hematite. The grains may contain inclusions of hematite, titanium oxide, feldspar, and fluorite. The fresh grains are characteristically straw yellow in transmitted light. The grains are, however, often variably altered and thereby dark, reddish-brown in colour. Almost opaque or opaque grains are not uncommon. Vague zoning is often seen in transmitted and reflected light, but the microprobe assays of the second grains did not reveal any distinct compositional zoning. The Ta content tends to be slightly higher in the cores of grains. The grains are metamixed due to the high uranium content. Representative analyses of pyrochlore and other NBTA-bearing minerals from the Motzfeldt Centre are given in Table 2. The pyrochlore from the Motzfeldt Centre show a marked compositional variation in the A and B cation groups of the pyrochlore formula A2B2X7. The most important cations are A equals Ca, Na, light rare earth elements, uranium, and B, NbTiTA, and X, OH, F, and Cl. The assayed grains do not contain detectable amounts of Sr and Ba. Zirconium is invariably pleasant. Zirconium is invariably present, but its content is often much below 1.5% ZrO2. The pyrochlore contains sporadically some lead, up to 4% PbO. In heavily altered grains, the iron content is very variable, and the bulk of it is probably related to the iron titanium oxide dust in the grains. In A cation groups, light rare earth elements 3+, and uranium 4+, substitute for Ca 2+, and to a lesser extent Na 1+. The variations in the B cation group contain mainly the substitution of Nb by Ta. Relatively high Nb contents are also accompanied by higher Ti values. The Motzfeldt pyrochlorites have considerable contents of light rare earth elements and U and Ta. The pyrochlorites can be roughly divided into two groups, those in the altered MSF syenite and those in the altered microsyenite respectively. The pyrochlore in the altered MSF syenite is characterized by higher Ta contents than in the altered peralkaline microsyenite. The Ta contents vary from 4.5 to 10% and 1.5 to 2.3%, Ta2, O5 respectively. The A position of the pyrochlore in the microsyenite is dominated by the light rare earth elements and uranium, up to 15% Re2O3 and 9% UO2 respectively. Whereas Ca is the main cation in the A position of the pyrochlore in the altered MSF syenite. The low analysis totals are probably due to both primary and secondary deficiencies in the A cation group. The primary deficiencies are due to the substitution of Ca and Na by ions with higher valencies, light rare earth elements, and uranium. The electrochemical stability is compensated by vacant places in the A cation positions and or simultaneous substitution of Mb and Ta by ions with lower valencies, such as Ti, Zr, Fe3+, etc. The loss of A group cations due to leaching and or hydration, secondary deficiencies, has affected the pyrochlore in the altered MSF syenite, in particular, as indicated by the backscattered electron assays of the pyrochlore grains from this unit. The NB-Ta ratio in the pyrochlore of the altered MSF syenite varies from 8 to 14, which generally coincides with the NB-TA ratios of the whole rock analyses, indicating that the bulk of NB and TA in the altered syenite is incorporated by the pyrochlore. Altered varieties of the pyrochlore in places show an anomalously low NB-TA ratio. The NB-TA ratio in the pyrochlore of the altered microsyenite is highly variable and ranges from Ca 18 up to 50 or even more. The distribution of the NATA in the altered microsyenite, especially in the silicified varieties of this rock suite, is complicated. The main carrier, again, is pyrochlore, but substantial amounts of NB and TA are incorporated into the zircon, thorite, iron titanium oxides, and columbite. These are compositionally very variable and often extremely fine-grained mixtures of several mineral phases. Number 3. Discussion and conclusions. The geochemical characteristics of the MRS can be accounted for by two processes. The preliminary element concentrations are related to the igneous process, such as fractional crystallization and gravitite settling. Furthermore, secondary element distribution took place during late-stage hydrothermal activity. Role as a concentrator, for instance. TH is well exemplified by Figure 3. 3.1. Evolution of the Motzfeldt Centre formation. Chilled margins comparable to those in the intrusions of the FDF have not been found in the MSF. Consequently, there is no direct evidence on the liquid composition of the MSF magma. Whether the more mafic mineral facies of the MSF, as indicated of a more basic primary liquid, is not known. Based on the composition of the unaltered inner parts of the MSF, Nepheline Syenite, whose geochemical characteristics are very similar to those of the FDF, where more direct evidence on the liquid composition is available, it is assumed that the bulk composition of the primary liquid was phonolytic. The rock types of the MFS, their field relationships, mineralogical and chemical characteristics all indicate an extreme internal differentiation in the phonolytic magma. The role of crystal fractionization as an effective mechanism to produce rocks of considerable variation in the Gardar central complexes have been emphasized. The rare earth element distribution patterns of the MSF rocks indicate that crystal fractionation has contributed to the evolution of the MSF. The evolution of the MSF thus commenced with the crystallization of the Ca-rich mineral phases, plagioclase, clinopyroxene, and the liquid became impoverished in Ba, Sr, and Eu. The MSF Nepheline Syenite, now representing the lowest part of the exposed igneous column, shows only slightly negative Eu anomalies, or no Eu anomaly at all. The syenite can be interpreted as the topmost part of a predominantly cumulative floor sequence, which was formed by crystallization along the sides and top of the chamber, and settling of the crystal elements and volatile components were increasingly concentrated at the top of the chamber. The peralkaline magma was able to dissolve large amounts of volatiles, and there may have been a gradual transition into a hydrothermal fluid. As first seen in the experiments of Tuttle and Brown and Tutel, the formation of the sheet complex could be related to the formation of such fluid phase. The upward migration of the fluid phase was probably further intensified by the formation of subhorizontal zones of weaknesses in a more or less completely solidified MSF. These zones could be related to the reduction of volume due to their crystallization. 3.2. Significance of volatile components. The most important volatile components in the initial magma were fluorine and water. The enrichment of water could have at least been in part due to the assimilation of country rocks, especially from the Erxfjord Formation. The bulk of Erxfjord Formation adjacent to the centre is made of sandstone, but inclusions of country rocks, other than the volcanics, are virtually absent in the MSF. This indicates that large-scale selective assimilation of the sandstones may have taken place. Whatever the case, the build-up of volatiles must have affected the physical and chemical properties of the residual magma/fluid. Enrichment of volatiles is known to increase the general acidity of the system. The general decrease in the content of a more basic cations, as exemplified by Ca and Na in the NbTA, Zr, and rare earth element mineral phases, at the higher levels of the igneous column, can be attributed to the decreased chemical activity of the more basic cations. The intense and pervasive formation of hematite and the other untitled titanium oxides implies that the fugacity of the oxygen, FO2, must have increased dramatically towards the end of the hydrothermal stage. An influx of meteoric water could have resulted in an increase of FO2 because the water would dissociate and the H2 would diffuse out of the system much more rapidly than O2. Sato and Wright in 1966 have shown that the silica gas in silica glass, H2 diffuses approximately 1,000,000 times faster than O2. 3.3 Outline of mineralization process. The migration and precipitation of TH, U, NB, TA, Zr, and rare earth elements have probably been a complicated process, which were controlled by the acidity and FO2, the oxygen fugacity, of the system. It can be expected that the migration involved continuous readjustment, precipitation leaching of the mineral phases, with the process preceding hydrothermal activity, which was accompanied by a relative and absolute enrichment of the high field strength elements due to the high stability and mobility of their complexes. The lower field strength of TA probably explains the lower mobility and earlier precipitation of TA at the lower levels of the igneous column. The formation of such a volume of peralkaline residuum with the extreme enrichment of volatiles and incompatible elements, as seen in the outer part of the MFS, implies that the fractionation must have been particularly effective. The reason why this happened only in MSF, whose primary magnetic characteristics were very similar to those of the FDAF, is a reflection of the different psychochemical conditions of the two magma suites. In comparison to the MSF, the FDF magmas have a lower oxygen fugacity and activity of silica. The development of chilled margins and porosity of pegmatite segregations in the FDF attest to the relatively dry and mobile nature of the FDF magmas. They were highly charged with dissolved deplomerizing volatiles such as fluorine and chlorine, which enhanced fluidity and facilitated the development of cumulate structures. The lack of late-stage enrichment of volatiles mineralization in the FDF may imply that the volatile phase had left the system as a consequence of, for example, volcanic activity. The abundance and increase of the content of hydrous mineral phases, along with the increasing degree of alteration mineralization in the MSF, attest to the importance of water in the mineralization process. It is proposed that the high content of volatiles, especially water, as a result of the influx of meteoric water, which lowered the viscosity of the melt, and thus facilitated convection and liquid stage differentiation, as well as extended the crystallization range of the rocks, was a decisive factor for the effective fractionation and the development of the extensive hydrothermal regime in the MSF. The extreme enrichment of the volatile components of the altered MSF Syenite indicates that the system was effectively closed until the very last stages of hydrothermal activity. The overall geometry of the hydrothermally altered MSF displays many similarities of the H2O saturated outer cell or carapace in the granite and granodiorite intrusions, where porphyry, copper, and molybdenum deposits formed. According to Burnham, in 1979, such a carapace acted as a barrier to the migration of volatiles either outwards to the wall rocks or inwards from the wall rocks. Thank you for listening to a reading of the Niobium-Tantalum mineralization in the Igneoclico Nepheline sister Syenite complexes in Greenland. My name is Liam Clark, and thank you. Goodbye.